Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV. We here are lifelong Catholics, and what we do here is all for free in love of Jesus Christ, in the most holy Trinity, and His holy Church. We'll defend our Holy Mother, the Church. Our work is the true sense of apostolate. Any funds raised goes back into this work for our equipment. This helps us to give you an unbiased, hard-hitting truth that is not controlled by political correctness or interest groups. Today we'll be doing our show that we do on today by Anthony C. Sutton from his book, National Suicide, Military Aid to the Soviet Union. And you'll love the show because we have all experienced censorship either on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, or any other social media account. But what's the true history behind this type of censorship? Where does it come from? And in today's show, we're going to get into that thanks to Anthony Sutton's book on commentary. I'll try to give you some commentary and break up the just reading the chapter to you. Because what we're going to read is, again, shocking. It'll shock you because it's truthful. So let's begin today's chapter. Chapter 3, Censorship in our military assistance to the Soviet Union. It starts out as the Department of State is not interested in devices to withhold information from the Congress. We fully understand that the Congress must have information if it is to perform its constitutional role in the field of foreign relations. William B. Macomber, Jr., Deputy Undersecretary for Administration, Department of State, July 13th, 1971. Which we know from watching all these congressional hearings, that is a load of crock. Because they never hand over the documents that Congress is requesting. So let's get into this a little bit. Now this is directly from Sutton. The ability of the Soviet Union to present a credible military threat is the result of past and present technical assistance by the United States and its allies. Much of the American evidence substantiating this statement is still in classified government files. Consequently, the reader may justifiably ask how it is possible to write this book. Furthermore, if the evidence is classified, how does the writer even know that it exists? Information for this book was obtained from three main sources: declassified U.S. government files, in some cases declassified with the assistance of an intervention by members of Congress, congressional investigations, reports, hearings, and unscheduled information leaks, and finally, information from Soviet sources. It is a paradox and a sad commentary on the state of freedom of information in the United States that considerably more detailed information came from censored Soviet sources than from the U.S. government sources. Let us look at each of these information sources in more detail. So the first one, declassified U.S. government files as a source of information. Classification is freely undertaken by thousands of government officials under President Eisenhower's 1953 executive order But declassification is a slow, intermittent process, even for documents with no relation at all to national security. Documents with significant political implications are apparently not declassified. According to National Archives public relations releases, almost all government documents more than 25 years old are open for research. This is not the situation in practice. However, the files of the State Department contain numerous documents dated earlier than 1947, i.e., over 25 years old, that are still classified. Indeed, whole sections of records with no present national security import, which are well over 25 years old, are under complete prohibition for non-official research. For example, in May 1964, Donald J. Simon of the Department of State sent a letter to Wayne C. Grover of the National Archives, requesting a 75-year restriction on the following files: records of the Office of the Counselor and Office of the Chief Special Agent, 1916 to 1928, National Archives Job, Roman numeral 3, NLD 105, signed on March 31st, 1955. These records have no relation to national security and are between 44 to 56 years old. That is well over the 25-year limit. This section of documents may contain information on American residents and citizens who went to Russia in 1917 to overthrow the provisional government and install the Bolsheviks. An interesting topic for academic investigation. Personal investigative records of U.S. citizens should, of course, be subject to careful restriction, but this hardly applies to revolutionaries who voluntarily left the United States to become Bolsheviks, or to persons who have acted on behalf of foreign governments when these actions have major historical significance. On April 8, 1971, the writer was refused access to this record group by the National Archives. So we do not know exactly which citizens of these United States left the United States to join and become Bolshevik revolutionaries. But we do know that one of the famous Bolshevik revolutionaries, Trotsky, was sent from Russia to New York to get the funding needed, and with the help of Woodrow Wilson, to get the papers, including a U.S. passport, and from what we could tell in our show on that, a U.S. citizenship to make everything look valid, so we can go back to Russia to start the Bolshevik Revolution. Very interesting. Let's continue. Information suppression concerning Soviet relations with the United States may be found in all administrations, Democrat and Republican, from President Wilson to President Nixon. For example, on November 28, 1917, just a few weeks after the Petrograd and Moscow Bolsheviks had overthrown the democratic and constitutional government of Russia, Colonel House, then in Paris, intervened on behalf of the Bolsheviks and cabled President Wilson, the Secretary of State, in the special green cipher of the State Department as follows. There has been cabled over and published here in Paris statements made by American papers to the effect that Russia should be treated as an enemy. It is exceedingly important that such criticism should be suppressed. Suppression of information critical of the Bolsheviks and the Soviet Union may be traced in the State Department files from this 1917 House cable down to the present day, when export licenses issued for admittedly military equipment exports to the USSR are not available for public information. See page 134 in this book. In fact, Soviet sources must be used to trace the impact of American technology on Soviet economic and military development. The Soviet Register of Shipping, for example, publishes the technical specifications of main engines in Russian vessels, including country of manufacturer. This information is not available from U.S. official sources. In November 1971, the Krasnaya Zvezda published an article with specific reference to the contribution of the basic Soviet industrial structure to the Soviet military power, a contribution that representatives of the U.S. executive branch have implicitly and explicitly denied to the public and to Congress. U.S. assistance to the Soviet military-industrial complex and its weapon systems cannot be documented from open U.S. sources alone because export license memoranda and instructions are classified data. Unless the technical nature of our shipments to the USSR is known, it is impossible to determine their contribution to the Soviet military complex. This technical information is not declassified. See Appendix A in this book, and thus the facts must come from Soviet sources. See the prolific detail in Appendix C in this book. The national security argument is not acceptable as a defense for classification because the Soviets know what they are buying. So does the United States government. So do U.S. firms. The groups left out in the cold are the American taxpayer voter and independent researchers. From time to time, bills have been introduced in Congress to make such export license information freely available. These bills have never received administration support. The late Congressman Glenard P. Lipscomb was a strong supporter of such bills. The latest bill to require publication of such data was introduced by Congressman Schmitz as H.R. 8300 of May 11, 1971, and referred to the Committee on Banking and Currency. To require the publication of lists on a quarterly basis of individuals and firms who export any goods or services valued at $1,000 or more in any calendar quarter to any communist-dominated nation. The non-availability of current information means that decisions affecting all Americans are made by relatively few government officials without impartial outside scrutiny. In many cases, these decisions would not be sustained if subjected to public examination and criticism. It is argued by the policymakers that decisions affecting national security, international relations cannot be made in a goldfish bowl. The obvious answer to this is the history of the past 50 years. We have had one catastrophic international problem after another. And in fact, the tile light of history, the outcome would have been far less costly if the decisions had been made in a goldfish bowl. Meaning, You could look in and see what's going on. You could give your criticism. You can openly denounce it. You can openly say, what the heck they doing? And again, we see this today. One such example has already been given. On November 28, 1917, Colonel House, who had no official position in the U.S. government and had never been elected to office, cabled President Wilson just 2 weeks after the start of the Russian Revolution to suppress newspaper criticism of the emerging Bolsheviks. It is cabled House exceedingly in the confidential file and was not declassified until the 1960s. Open public discussion in 1917 of Colonel House's instructions and intentions might well have changed the history of the world. A little more than a decade after House's appeal to Wilson, Senator Smoot inquired of the State Department about the military end uses of an aluminum powder plant to be erected in the Soviet Union by W. Hahn, an American engineer. According to William McComber, opening paragraph of the chapter, the department did not withhold information from Congress, but State Department files contain a recently declassified document which states why no reply was given to Senator Smoot. No reply was made to Senator Smoot by the Department by the department, as the secretary did not desire to indicate that the department had no objection to the rendering by Mr. Hahn of technical assistance to tile Soviet authorities and the production of aluminum powder in view of the possibility of its use as war material, and preferred to take no position at the time in regard to the matter. U.S. State Department Decimal File 861.659 DuPont de Nemours and Company /5. Aluminum powder is used, among other military applications, to raise the explosive force of ammunition. The Operation Keyhole file, presently classified by the Department of the Army, is a prominent example of politically motivated censorship. The 1945 file, classified secret in 1972, relates to the forced and brutal repatriation of 4 million Russians to the Soviet Union by the United States and Britain after World War II. It is probably the greatest single blot of all time on British and American diplomacy. The question has no possible relation to current national security, yet declassification has been repeatedly refused. Julius Epstein in the American Civil Liberties Union sued the Secretary of the Army under the Freedom of Information Act, but a U.S. District Court of Appeals upheld continued classification as not arbitrary and capricious. Photo Reporter, 2nd Series, page 930. The Supreme Court denied review. In brief, declassified government files are not sufficient to substantiate the argument of this book. The key documents, in many cases, whole sections of files, are completely off limits to Congress, the independent researcher, and the general public. Congressional action, the Freedom of Information Act, and the administration claims of speedy declassification have not changed this basic situation. The major significant documents governing the history of the past 50 years are buried, and they will remain buried until an outraged public opinion puts some pressure on Congress. If the documents are still there in 2020, and whenever the Christian Party rises to power in all the elections of the local, state, and federal and the White House, winning the majority in the states and in the houses of Congress and in the White House, and put our members into these departments. And if these files are still there and still able to be read, these files need to be unburied, brought to the light of day for everyone to read about the shameful and dark truth about the American government, how it funded and put Hitler into power, how it killed hundreds of millions of people, how it killed their own servicemen. These documents need to be released now. And all this truth must be revealed. This dark history, people say the slavery issue in America was a very dark time. Yes, it is. Yes, it was. But is allowing the U.S. government since the time of Woodrow Wilson to what? Presently? How far back? George W. Jr., George Bush Jr., Obama, maybe even under Trump. But these things are still going on with Brown Brothers, Harriman, and all the Rockefeller banks, the J.P. Morgan banks. You caused the rise of communism around the world, who killed hundreds of millions of people under communism, who killed a good number of people in the Holocaust, and a good number of U.S. and Allied servicemen and women in battle. I believe that is a even more darker history of America that needs to be told. And it can only be told when all these documents that are probably still buried need to come to light. And you need to get Sutton's books. You can find them all on PDF form. If you just search Anthony C. Sutton, his Wikipedia page should come up, and hopefully all his books are still linked there in PDF form. Get those and paperback versions of his books. Let's continue. Congressional investigations and unscheduled leaks. So now we see about these leaks, we see something leak out to the press and we're like, where'd that come from? And all that. This is where it comes from, folks. Let's begin. From time to time, congressional investigations have unearthed caches of relevant data that would not normally be released. These data have been supplemented by corporate and individual investigations. For example, in 1970, the import of presumably embargoed Rhodesian chrome ore as Soviet chrome ore prompted Crucible Steel Company to undertake a technical investigation of the real origin of the so-called Soviet ore. Excuse me. Government files from Great Britain, Canada, France, and especially pre-1945 Germany have provided data not obtainable from U.S. government files. Finally, we have leaks such as the Major Jordan records on the precise nature of U.S. lend-lease to the USSR, confirmed 20 years later by declassified government files. Congress has investigated and subsequently published reports on the export of strategic materials to the Soviet Union. One of such instances, called a life and death matter by Congress, was a 1961 case concerning the proposed shipment of ball bearing machines to the USSR. U.S. Senate Committee on the Judiciary proposed shipment of ball bearing machines to the USSR, Washington, 1961. The Bryant Chucking Grinder Company accepted a Soviet order for 35 Centoline B machines for processing miniature ball bearings. All such precision ball bearings in the United States used by the Department of Defense for missile guidance systems were processed on 72 Bryant Centoline Model B machines. In 1961, the Department of Commerce approved the export of 35 such machines to the USSR, which would have given the Soviets capability about equal to 50% of the U.S. capability. The Soviets had no equipment for such mass production processing, and neither the USSR nor any European manufacturer could manufacture such equipment in the near future. A Department of Commerce statement that there were other manufacturers was shown to be inaccurate. Commerce proposed to give the Soviet Union an ability to use its higher thrust rockets with much greater accuracy and so pull ahead of the United States. Subsequently, a congressional investigation yielded accurate information not otherwise available to independent non-government researchers and general public. Let's see here. When was that? 1961. Right in the day of the space age. Let me see when. So in 1957, Sputnik 1 was launched on October 4th, 1957. And this is from 1961. Gave approval of the ball bearing machines to help and build the rocket factories, make the rockets faster and more accurate. Congressional investigations have also unearthed extraordinary errors of judgment by high officials. For example, in 1961, a dispute arose in U.S. government circles over the transformatic case, a proposal to ship to the USSR 2 transfer lines with a total value of $4.3 million for the production of truck engines. In a statement dated February 23, 1961, representatives of the Department of Defense went on record against shipment of transfer lines on the grounds that the technology contained in these transformatic machines produced in the United States is the most advanced in the world, and that so far that as this department knows that USSR has not installed this type of machinery. The receipt of this equipment by the USSR will contribute to the Soviet military and economic warfare potential. Get ready to be shocked, folks. This argument was arbitrarily overturned by incoming Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. In response to a latter inquiry from the Congressional Investigating Committee, he stated, "I concluded that the Defense Department should not oppose export licenses for the transformatic machines in question. My decision was based solely on the merits of the case as I saw them from the point of view of alternate sources and availability of comparable machinery, and was in no part dictated by political or other policy considerations. My decisions in this case was based on knowledge of this type of machinery and of its alternate source of supply. As you know, the transfer machines were not to be used for manufacture of military vehicles, but rather for the production of medium-priced or high-priced passenger cars. Your letter asks whether I consulted with other knowledgeable persons before making my April decision on transformatic machines. The answer is that I viewed this case through myself. I did not consult formally with other automotive experts, as I had the benefit of recent and direct experience with the equipment concerned in private industry." Secretary McNamara did not point out that the most Soviet military trucks came from 2 American-built plants, even then receiving equipment from the United States. The transformatic machines approved by McNamara had clear and obvious military uses, as the Department of Defense had previously agreed, which led to our boys being slaughtered in Vietnam. So, yeah, there you go. Awful, awful, awful. Now onto the Soviet Union as a source of information. In practice, the Soviet Union is a more prolific source of hard information that can be blended with declassified U.S. files. The availability of data on the origin of the main engines of Soviet ships used on the Haiphong supply run in the Cuban missile crisis is a prime example of the Soviet Union publishing detailed information not available from the U.S. government sources and directly conflicting with official statements made by the U.S. government officials. See Appendix G for the related case of the transport of Russian missiles to Cuba. Now, weren't we told to believe that during the Cold War that you could not get anything out of Russia to get truthful information? Weren't we led to believe that in all the Tom Clancy CIA made movies, or the movie with Harrison Ford about the nuclear submarine K-19, the Widowmaker? Yet this book was written during the Cold War, folks. The 70s, and I think the 70s. yet they are freer with information than the U.S. government. It's kind of interesting here, folks. Very interesting. This case of the origin of Soviet vessels, for which ample and accurate hard data are available, is worth exploring. For most of the period since 1949, the Battle Act and the Export Control Act have supposedly prohibited the export of transportation technology for military purposes. However, the specific case-by-case determinations made by state, commerce, and COCOM within the framework of these laws are classified. It is not possible to obtain free access to the relevant decision papers to examine the manner in which the intent of Congress has been administered. We do know, however, that any member of the COCOM coordinating committee, the operating arm of the consultative group established by NATO and Japan in 1950 to coordinate the export controls of the major industrial nations, group of nations has veto power, and that no shipment has ever been made to the Soviet Union without the unanimous approval of all members. Thus, the transfer of Danish marine technology in 1959 had implicit or explicit State Department approval. Some years ago, research strongly suggested that the Soviets had no indigenous military transfer technology, neither motor vehicles nor marine diesel engines. Yet about 80% of the weapons and supplies for the North Vietnamese were transported by some means from the Soviet Union. The greater part of these Soviet weapons went to Vietnam by Soviet freighters, then along the Ho Chi Minh Trail on Soviet-built trucks. By using data of Russian origin, all the main diesel by using data of the Russian origin, it is possible to make an accurate analysis of the origins of this equipment. It was found that all the main diesel and steam turbine propulsion systems of the 96 Soviet ships on the Haiphong supply road that could be identified, i.e., 84 out of the 96 originated in design or construction outside the USSR. We can conclude, therefore, that if the State and Commerce departments in the 1950s and 60s had consistently enforced the legislation passed by Congress in 1949, the Soviets would not have the ability to supply the Vietnamese War, and 50,000 more Americans, and countless Vietnamese, would be alive today. The names of the 96 Soviet ships used on the Haiphong run were gleaned from Morskoy Flot and similar Russian maritime publications. Acknowledgment is gratefully made to the Joseph Choir of Washington, D.C. for his assistance. The specifications of the main engines were obtained from Registrovia, Nignia, Morske, Surov, Soyuz, SSR, and other Russian sources. This sort of information came from censored Soviet sources. The same information is only available in the West in classified government files, and is therefore totally censored to the independent researcher in the Congress. In this case, not only such case, Soviet censorship is far less restrictive than that of the United States. U.S. classification of information also conceals another fundamental problem, that illegal or inefficient administration of the export control laws in the 1950s and 60s gave the Soviets the ability to supply the North Vietnamese in the 1960s. Is it ringing any alarm bells, folks? That we have a government more tight-lipped about all their illegal activities than the previous Soviet Union. And it shouldn't be shocking, because we, the United States, started the Soviet Union in the boardrooms of the New York bankers, same as the Nazi Party. It was all started in New York City. So the Soviet Union, the Bolsheviks, everything is American made. With the help of with help from our allies, we're also involved in doing all of this dirty work. Yet, most of these files are still classified. Thankfully, enough information was released for Sutton to do all of his books. So we need to push for all State Department files from the Cold War. I mean, everything we're learning about here that is still sort of hush hush and classified and past the 25-year mark where it's supposed to be declassified automatically needs to happen. So let's get into the censorship. And I want you to finish reading this chapter 3 of this book. And I want you to read this book. I want you to share this book. So the practical effect of censorship. The real reasons for concealment of information, or to put it more bluntly, censorship, are twofold. One, Washington officials do not want detailed public knowledge of policies that cannot be empirically defended. Two, firms trading with the Soviets do not want public knowledge of such sales because public knowledge might lead to adverse criticism, boycotts, and loss of domestic sales. You better believe it, buddy. Or worse, shut down of your businesses and everything taken from you by the federal government for helping a known enemy. But he didn't get into third. That would have been the third one, but oh well. Censorship has enabled appointment officials and permanent Washington bureaucracy to make almost unbelievably inaccurate statements without fear of challenge in Congress or by American public. Let's get that. Let's say that again. Because it says exactly what is going on with Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, all these social media uh, companies that are censoring people, Catholics, Christians, conservatives, whoever. Let's say the truth again. And Who started censorship? Censorship has enabled appointed officials and the permanent Washington bureaucracy to make almost unbelievably inaccurate statements without fear of challenge in Congress or by the American people. That is who is started this thing called censorship. Let's continue. State Department files are crammed with information concerning U.S. technical and economic assistance to the Soviet Union. The author of this book required 3 substantial volumes. See bibliography in the back of the book, folks. Just to summarize this assistance, yet Dean Rusk, presumably acting on the advice of the State Department researchers, could state in 1961, it was seen clear that the Soviet Union derives only the most marginal help in its economic development from the amount of U.S. goods it receives. This statement is flatly contradictory to the empirical evidence available in departmental files. In 1968, Nicholas B. Katzenbach, Assistant Secretary of State, made the statement that was similarly inconsistent with the observable fact and displayed a fundamental lack of common sense reasoning. We should have no illusions. If we do not sell peaceful goods to the nations of Eastern Europe, others will. If we erect barriers to our trade with Eastern Europe, we'll lose title trade and Eastern Europe will buy elsewhere. But we will not make any easier our task of stopping aggression in Vietnam, nor in building security for the United States. House of Representatives to amend the Export-Import Bank Act of 1945, Washington, 1968, page 64. In fact, aggression in South Vietnam would have been impossible without U.S. assistance to the Soviet Union. Much of the key European technology derives from U.S. subsidiaries. The United States has veto power within COCOM. Moreover, the United States holds the umbrella of security over Europe and has an excellent bargaining weapon. Looking at the evidence, it is more to the point that U.S. officials, such as Katzenbach, are not concerned with the national interest. Jack and Bierman, former Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Affairs at the Department of Commerce, repeated the same Alice in Wonderland theme on behalf of the Commerce Department. This is an old problem of economic dependency. However, I do not believe that Russia would in fact permit herself become dependent upon imported sources of strategic goods. Rather, she would import amounts additional to her strategic needs, thereby relieving the pressure on her economy by not risking dependence. House of Representatives, investigation and study of the administration, operation and enforcement of the Export Control Act of 1919 and related acts, Washington, 1962, page 428. In fact, Jack Bierman, to the contrary notwithstanding, Soviet Russia is the most dependent large nation in modern history for wheat as well as technology. Behind the smokescreen of misleading information, the most extraordinary government operation can be and have been conducted. Take the relatively harmless but still expensive can't talk right now. Escapades. First, in 1966, the U.S. Department of State produced a beautiful extravagantly illustrated brochure of American hand tools. This was printed in Russian for distribution in Russia, with a preface in Russian by Lyndon B. Johnson. Requested to the State Department for a copy of this brochure went unanswered. It is not listed in the official catalogs of government publications. It is not available or even known to the general public. No printer's name appears on the back cover. The publisher is not listed. The author obtained a copy direct from Russia. And this is a translation from the Russian brochure for Hand Tools USA. Welcome to Hand Tools USA. Exhibit the 8th consecutive exhibit arranged for citizens of the Soviet Union. At this exhibit, you will see samples of various hand tools currently manufactured in the United States, tools that facilitate manual work and make it possible to produce better quality industrial goods at a much lower cost. Since the very early days of the history of our country, Americans of all ages have worked with hand tools. In industry and at home, in factories and on farms, in workshops and schools. The hand tool has become indispensable in our lives. Some of these tools have retained their original simplicity of design. Others have acquired entirely new forms and are now used to perform new functions. We sincerely hope that this exhibit will lead you to better understanding of the American people and their way of life. Lyndon B. Johnson. Let's finish it up here on page 36. While the secrecy, what would have been the public reaction in 1966 when the Soviets were supplying the North vets with weapons to kill Americans? Over 5,000 were killed that year. If it had become known that the State Department had published lavish booklets in Russian for free distribution in Russia at the taxpayer's expense. So what would the public reaction be to all this? Leave your comment down below in today's show, or tweet it out to me on a tweet for this video or Mixcloud audio. What would your response be today on learning all of this? Let's get this answer from Mr. Sutton, who is in heaven watching down over us. Use his books to bring you the truth that has been denied since the end of World War I. So again, let's repeat these questions to you to end this video. Okay, why all the secrecy? What would have been the public reaction in 1966 when the Soviets supplying the North vets with weapons to kill Americans? Over 5,000 were killed that year. If it had become known that the State Department had published lavish booklets in Russian for free distribution in Russia at the taxpayer's expense. What do you think that reaction would have been in 1966? And what is your reaction today? Voice your reaction. Voice your disapproval. Ask questions. Get the truth. Know the truth. And defend the truth. And please go to today's show page. If you want to read this book right now, get the free PDF version, which is in the show page. Or if you want a paperback copy, click the book cover image. It'll take you to Amazon where you can get this book for $19, I think. If you don't want Amazon, search the title of this book on Barnes & Noble or wherever else you want to look online to get this book. And all you homeschool moms out there, you want to teach your children true American history, get Sutton's books and use them. That's all I'm going to say. So please like, share this video, the audio on Mixcloud, the video on BitChute, and please subscribe to us on BitChute and YouTube, and please follow us on Mixcloud, and we'll be back tomorrow, maybe, if things work out with time and scheduling for our religious program on the Antichrist within, because I'll be needing Brother Alexis with us for that. So with that, this is Ornamental Terrace Radio TV signing off. Deus Volt.